Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I work with the startup business development team. I cover the Nordics and Baltics, and I'm actually part of a global team. We're all ex-founders and ex-VCs, and we basically help startups scale using cloud technology or go-to-market strategy. So if you have questions, come find me or my colleague Angela here afterwards. So how many of you know what the Dunbar number is, or the rule of 150? Basically, the definition is the cognitive limitation of the number of individuals you can have a relationship with. And I'm basically here to talk to you about how do you go from that 2-person in the garage to scaling your team to 150 and going beyond that. So I'm sure many of you know Steve Blank. He's the guru of startups, and he's created this customer development process. And he says that most of the startups end up looking at the beginning phase, which is a search phase, and that's customer discovery and also customer validation. And they iterate and pivot and go back and forth, back and forth. And he says that little time is spent on the execution portion of it, which is basically customer creation, and even less time is spent on company building. And when he refers to company building, he actually talks about the Shakespearean tragedy, meaning when you have worked for many, many years with blood, sweat, and tears, your company may fall apart. Your investors may push you out. You may not have the best co-founders. Your engineering team is just all over the place, not really working in unison. But many, many people have also been successful, are going from 2 people to scaling at their company, even post-IPO, and even with a company such as Amazon, where we now have over 500,000 employees. So how do these founders, how do they take their company to the next phase? I'm going to dive deep into Airbnb, which is one of our customers, and they do an amazing job at illustrating how culture really impacts their business and how they're growing. So Airbnb, when they got their Series C funding back in 2012, Brian Chesky, the CEO, invited Peter Thiel, the investor, to his office, and they were talking about different metrics and how the company is growing. And Brian asked Peter, what's the most important advice that you can give us? And he basically said, don't fuck up the culture. And that got Brian thinking, and he penned a very famous blog post, which you can find. And he defined culture as, the culture is what creates the foundation for all future innovation. If you break the culture, you break the machine that creates your products. And that's a very powerful phrase. Evernote said something similar along the lines that product is the product, the culture is the next 100 products. So what does that mean? What is your startup DNA, and when should you start thinking about culture in your company? How is it that you keep that excitement when you first had the idea and branch it out to beyond what your company is? Basically, you start right now. At Amazon, we have this saying, every day is day one. So that's how we think about it. And it's really important, the people that you bring on board. So the first few hires are crucial because they're going to set basically the rules of your company. They're going to hire other people. They're going to decide how the product is being launched. If you hire people that are mediocre and not motivated, that could be disastrous for your company, even before your product is even launched. So make sure that you hire A players. And what's really interesting about the Airbnb is that Brian Chesky personally said it on the first 300 hires of his company because he wanted to make sure that all these people instill the DNA for the others to come. And we do the same thing at Amazon as well, and I'll go into that case study in a little bit. Every single person at Amazon is trained to interview, and we actually have a course called Making Great Hiring Decisions because we want to make sure that we bring on people that have our DNA as well. So the biggest challenge is finding people and finding the right people. So part of my job, what I do is, I help with startups. Sometimes we discuss funding, we create an investor pitch deck, and then we create a customer pitch deck, try to illustrate the value proposition of their product. But little time is spent on an employee pitch deck. What is it that makes your company unique? Glassdoor actually came out with a study a couple of years ago saying that employers that spend time creating an employer deck and work on employer branding are 3 times as likely to hire quality people.
You attract people who have the DNA of pioneers and the DNA of explorers. You build a company of like-minded people who want to invent. And that's what they think about when they get up in the morning. How are we going to work backwards from customers and build a great service or a great product.
So that's what Jeff Bezos has to say about keeping the DNA within your company. So what is it that you have to think about? So when you're early stage, identify your values. Who do you want to be? But then when you move on to that next phase, what should you think about? Then after that, you should think about your organization, the mechanisms and the structure that you want to put in place in order to take that culture and move it beyond. So Airbnb, what they've actually done is they say that good culture creates an environment where people can do their best work. So how they're organized is they have very small teams, so more of the DevOps methodology. But these small teams are very cross-functional. So the developers work with the designers, work with data scientists, and they keep the host team and the host team and then the guests separate because they realize that there's different needs for that. But because of the symbiotic relationship for both hosts and the guest, they also kind of work together as well. So they share product roadmaps, they team up on projects, they share goals as well. And basically they define their team as structured teams with fluid responsibility. And that's how they're able to maintain their culture and their DNA from the two people that started sleeping on airbags all the way to scaling out their company. So what's important? So make sure you instill the culture into the founding team. We've talked about making sure that you instill the culture into the employees, the people that you hire, but also get your investors on board. The last couple of talks we talked about investors and that relationship being almost like a marriage. Make sure that you bring in the right people, make sure that they understand your value, your philosophy. And you can also extend that to your customers and to your partners. So in the case of Airbnb, I'm sure you know the superhost designation. If you're a great host, have great reviews, then they'll give you like a little medal on your profile. So they've extended their culture beyond their walls. And even at AWS, we have done that with our partner. So we have partner accreditation, people that we accreditate on delivering our services to other customers on our behalf. Another example I'd like to give you is Spotify. So if you search for Spotify engineering culture, you'll have two really cool videos. And one of the first videos, I really like it. It starts off by saying, we don't even see culture because it's everywhere. It's like the air we breathe. The culture is so instilled into the company that they don't even notice it. And how they're structured is that they have small squads of 10 people or less. And these squads kind of work from beginning to end in the product life cycle of whatever service that they're pushing out. And then they also work, collaborate together as well. And they've depicted how they work into this Dilbert-like little quadrant. So Spotify believes that if you have low alignment and low autonomy, then that's going to cause micromanagement, which is not really fun. But if you have high alignment and low autonomy, then you're just being told what to do and how to do it, and that's not really fun either. If you have low alignment and high autonomy, then maybe your engineering team is just all over the place and not really working together in a unified fashion. So what they strive to do every day is to be in the quadrant up there where it's circled, is to have high alignment and high autonomy, meaning they figure out together what the problem is, but the squad of 10 or less is responsible for working on the solution and coming up with the solution. Another one of our customers, Supercell, they have $2 billion in revenue, 4 games, and only 200 people. I still can't wrap my head around that. So they have a bottom-up structure, what they call like a stealth structure, and each of the games have their own teams. And the upper management, they're considered resources and tools and services for the team, whereas in a lot of organization, it's the other way around, where you have the upper management and you see the team as your resources. And what's really cool about their culture is that they celebrate failures in a big way. They actually have champagne parties. They've actually named some of their conferences by failed games, and they take all these learnings and implement it into their production. So what happens when you go from a company like Supercell to 200 to a company that's scaling to over 500,000 people? And this is where the Amazon story comes along. So what is it that keeps all these 500,000 employees coming together and having the same language? It's basically our 14 leadership principles. A lot of times, I'm sure you've worked for the companies where you have principles and visions and you kind of learn about them for the interview and you talk about them the first week and you forget about them. But that's not the case at the company. And from personal experience, when I was interviewed at Amazon, 90% of my questions were based on these leadership principles. And the course that I told you about that each employee takes, making great hiring decisions, 90% of that is based on the leadership principles because we teach the employees how to hire and make sure that these future employees have this DNA. And we don't just talk about this during interviews. Every strategy that we do for customers, for our products and services, we instill these principles as well. When we do performance measurements, we also instill these principles. And I'll dive deep into a couple of them as well. So basically, principles are the clear guidelines that defines your company. And whenever, at least within our company, when I'm thinking about prioritization or strategy development, I always think about this and how I can work backwards from these principles. So one of them is ownership, and our textbook definition of that is leaders or owners, they think long-term and don't sacrifice long-term value for short-term results. They act on behalf of the entire company beyond just their own team. They never say, that's not my job. And just to give you a definition of leader, it's not upper management. Every single person at the company is considered a leader. So you have to roll up your sleeves. So the way we're structured, so after taking Jeff Bezos in his garage to 500,000 employees, is more of a DevOps methodology. And that terminology is so big right now, but we actually embraced it back in 2003. And we've actually created small teams so we can move very fast, be very agile, and have that startup feeling. We actually call it the 2-pizza team. So if you have a team and you can't feed it with 2 pizzas, American-style pizzas, which are much bigger, then we reorganize and we make the teams a bit smaller. Dive deep is another one. Leaders operate at all levels and stay connected to the details and audit frequently. No task is beneath them. So basically what all the leaders at Amazon do is we not only have a 50,000 meter view, but we also go down to the very, very detail. And the way we do this is we're a very data-driven metrics company. And some of the things that we do is we have a weekly metrics meeting. And on that scoreboard that every single 2-pizza team has, we put all the metrics that are impacting the customer. And we take a look at the line graph. And when we see that the data is not going the way it should be, then we kind of correct. And sometimes we notice this before the customer is impacted, and sometimes the customer may potentially be impacted. So what happens then? So I can give you an example of Amazon Instant Video. When it launched, there seemed to be a glitch in the system. We didn't know what it was, but we were diving deep into the data, and someone on the team noticed it. We went very, very deep and noticed that whenever a customer played back a video, they had issues with it and poor quality. So what we did, instead of waiting to hear back from the customer, we proactively emailed every single customer and apologized and sent them a refund. So we were not only able to dive very deep into our data, but we were also customer obsessed and we're able to delight our customers ahead of time. So which brings us to the last one that I'll talk about, and the most important one is customer obsession. Leaders start with the customer and work backwards. They work vigorously to earn and keep customers' trust. All the leaders pay attention to competitors. They obsess over customers. Now, how do we do this? We have a methodology behind that as well. It's called the working back method at Amazon. So what we do is when anyone in the company has an idea, and it could be me or someone below me or someone much higher me, so even a new employee or an employee that's been there for 10 plus years, we do a working back document. And what that entails is we first write a PR document. That means, what is my product or my service going to look like 6 months from now if I were to publish this PR document, let's say in the Wall Street Journal? So we take a customer perspective, we describe the product, we say how much it is, we get quote unquote customer testimonials, and then we take this document and we share it internally with our stakeholders. We also sometimes share it with selected customers as well. If there's no excitement, we don't write a single line of code. If we do see excitement and a lot of questions, then we move on to the next phase, which is called the FAQ. So in the FAQ, we try to answer any question that the customer may have. Does it come in orange? Is it available in Sweden? Can I get an extra large? So we try to get as detailed as possible before we start building. And then after that, we create our MVPs, or even before the MVPs. So for example, at AWS, the EC2 API, was actually the primitive for our EC2 storage compute services, and our S3 API was the primitive for our S3 storage services. And once we created the primitive, we launch and we iterate, and we do it fast and we do it often. But what's also important is the rate of experimentation, and Jeff also has something to say about that.
But successful invention, if you want to do a lot of that, you basically have to increase your rate of experimentation. And that you can think of as a process. How do you go about organizing your systems, your people, all of your assets, your own daily life and how you spend time? How do you organize those things to increase your rate of experimentation?
So just to give you an idea, these are old numbers that I can share. Our rate of experimentation, we deploy every 11.6 seconds to production. A lot of companies sometimes take 3 months to 6 months to do that, but we do it every 11.6 seconds. And this is not testing, it's actual production that we push out. And it's pushed out to over 10,000 to 3,000 instances at a time, which is quite fast. So we've talked about Amazon, we've talked about Airbnb, we've talked about Spotify and Supercell. And so the big takeaway is, think about your culture, your values. What is it that defines you? What are your behaviors? How would you like to be perceived? Who would you like to hire? What kinds of people you would like to hire? And then once you have that at the beginning, how can you put in mechanisms in place in your organization that's going to allow for you to rapidly innovate and have a speedy rate of experimentation? Oh, that's it. Thank you.